Welcome to another episode of Chad's Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by the North Idaho College and their upcoming Accessibility Camp Coeur d'Alene, which is on August 2nd and 3rd in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. More information on the Alley Camp Symposium can be found at nic.edu/A11Y camp. So we want to thank them for being our sponsor for today's podcast. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as Director of Training Solutions and Principal at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I'm Director of Media Productions here at Chax Training Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as Accessible Document Specialists for the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. If you'd like your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications and learn more. Chad, I actually just finished supplying all of my documentation for maintaining my certification, right?
Yes.
I know, yeah. It's a process, right?
It really is. It really is. You know, you and I got our certification about 2 years ago.
Yep.
Right. And then, to maintain your certification, you have to do a certain number
35.
Yeah, 35 credits, right? It's organized by credit, but which includes helping other people with accessibility, speaking at conferences, of course, writing articles,
Yep.
right? All of those things kind of cumulatively are part of maintaining your certification moving forward. So, I had submitted mine a little while back, and I think I actually kind of prompted you to submit yours, because I got a notification from them that said, "Hey, we collected all your stuff and everything looks good," and I told you about it, and you're like, "Oh shoot, I gotta submit mine." So I'm glad to see you got yours submitted.
Well, what was interesting is that, as speakers, we often get a stipend. We get some kind of, payment. We write articles, we get payment. And for IAAP, you cannot use paid presentations or paid speaking gigs. And if you present the same presentation with the same title at different conferences, you'll only get credit for it once. You can't say, "Oh, I presented accessible infographics at CSUN, and then I present as a 1-hour lab, and then I did it as a half-day conference at this other one." They're like, no, only one time you can present the idea. And I thought, wow, okay. I pushed back a little bit, but in the end, I understand, and it all got taken care of. But the end result is, guys, the certification means something. It really is a valuable certification, and we're seeing more and more LinkedIn job posts with CPAC and IAA, and ADS or WAS certifications as part of the requirements. So, as an accredited certification and not just a certificate of completion, there's a lot of vetting that has to go on with who gets to have those who gets to have those credentials. So kudos to IAAP.
Yeah. It's certainly a valuable, certification to have, I think, for sure.
Today we wanted to talk about something that's come up actually quite a few times and recently. I don't know, things come in waves, right?
They do.
So we've had we do these one-on-one training sessions. So if you don't know, accessibilityunraveled.com, you go there at the upper left-hand corner, you can actually book one-on-one time with Chad or I in increments like 15 minutes. So 15, 30, an hour, etc. And someone just booked some time with me to ask the question, what do I do when there's a repeating navigation on every page for accessibility? Because I'm getting 100, for them it was 100 untagged annotation errors, because the document had 100 pages in it, and there was this icon in the upper right hand corner that had a kind of back to home button. And so we had a long conversation about that, and you and I have talked about it a couple of times on the podcast. But Chad, what just for our listeners, kind of, what are some of the barriers? Why is the nav bar a bad thing?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, when they put a nav bar on in a PDF file, they're trying to mimic a web page,
Right.
right? They're kind of trying to mimic that behavior. And I think there is some merit to that, I suppose, right? But I also argue it, because putting a nav bar in a PDF can create a lot of challenges, right? Not just not just in your file generally, but also certainly for accessibility, right?
Right.
And one of the big issues, right? We always need to remember that when people use assistive technology, they're really reading the document in a linear fashion from beginning to end, right? So I always say, and this is somewhat true, but I always say that the concept of a page is somewhat irrelevant to somebody using assistive technology.
Right.
Even though JAWS and NVDA does let you know when you go from one page to another, fundamentally, like, the user doesn't really care, right? They're just like, listen, read, what's the content? What's my next heading?
Right.
Whatever it is. And so when you're reading content in a linear fashion, what happens is that nav bar, I should say, the user is forced to read that navigation on every page.
Right.
Right. So imagine, I don't know what analogy to use, Dax, but, imagine as a sighted user, you're when we read a document like that, our brain just ignores it, right? Unless we really need it. Right.
Well, think about this. Like, if you were when you're looking at the menu at a restaurant and you look up at the board on the wall, your brain doesn't read every single item out loud to yourself in your mind. You kind of skim through it, skip down to the one you want. Oh, burritos, there it is. And then, chicken burrito, right? So that kind of thing. The same thing with assistive technology is that, as a sighted person, the nav bar, we can ignore it, no problem. But for people using assistive technology, they're forced to walk through every item in the menu. Imagine you had to tell the person at the cash register every single item. I don't want this. I don't want that. I don't want this. I don't want that. I want this. That would be a definitely arduous experience, to say the least.
It really would. And if you think about it, I mean, many times on a page, the content on a page continues on the next page.
Yeah.
Right? Like a paragraph will literally break in half.
Yep.
But again, to a user of assistive technology, they don't know that.
Right.
They don't know that a paragraph starts on one page and ends on another.
Right.
Right. They're just reading the content. But imagine mid-paragraph, you're forced to read a navigation of home, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, however it's organized, right? It's really just a really bad user experience. And that's one of the things we wanted to talk to today, Dax, about, what is a bad user experience, right?
Right.
And that could be a classic example, right? I mean, would we call it a barrier? I don't know that I would. I would just say that it stinks.
Well,
what I mean?
I know that if I were going through that document and I had to hear the nav every single time, I'm just like, okay, enough. Skip. And then I think, honestly, what you would end up doing is figuring out, probably by the third page, that there are, in this case, there was only one item, but in a matter of fact, we'll pull up on screen this other example. This is one that actually has a nav bar down the right-hand side, and I've blurred out the company information to protect the innocent. But somebody posted this on our Facebook group, and it's got a nav bar with 2, 4, 6, there's probably 7. They only show part of a page, but there's 7 different items vertically listed on the right-hand edge of the page. And imagine, I think that the end user would probably finally figure out, okay, by the 4th page, I need to press the right arrow 7 times to get through the content, right?
Yeah.
But what a pain in the butt that is for someone using assistive technology. Now, you and I actually did a document like this for a very well-known entity with a blue icon that has recently changed their name. And they had an internal document where they had put this nav bar across the top, and they're like, we want this nav bar. We absolutely need it in here. And we said, okay, well, here's what we need to do then. Every page has to start with a heading. That you can't have content that moves from one page to another because what we want to be able to do is tag the very first item in the nav bar to say, to skip the nav bar, press H to move to skip to main content. And basically what we're doing is mimicking what you can do already in HTML. They hide the link that skip to main content so that you can just, people using assistive technology can move down. And so it really was a designing with accessibility in mind, because once you did it, it was great. And the user could just press H and bounce right to the right content.
Well, and you and I have talked about creating a consistent user experience.
Yeah.
Right. And I think this really falls into that, because once the user hears that once, maybe twice.
Yep.
Now, every time they hear press H to, they're going to be like, boom, and they're going to skip it. So it employs them. It gives them the capability to not be forced to read that information on every page. They could say, nope, skip it, and kind of keep going. I mean, you could argue that it's still
cumbersome,
distracting, cumbersome. Yeah. However you want to phrase it, but at least you're giving them the ability to not be forced to, like you said, hit the right arrow key 7 times to get out of that navigation on every page. I mean, that's going to get old quick.
It reminds me of the tab cards in HTML, where you've got a widget that has tabs at the top, and there's a piece of text in the middle that every time you move to the other tab, a new factoid or whatever comes up. For people using assistive technology, they have to activate a tab, then move right however many tabs there are, 5 tabs, to get to the main content, listen to it, and then shift tab back 5 times to activate the next one, and then do this whole cycle. So it reminds me a lot of that. But so there are 3 goals here. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I need to understand this because we're doing this in our documents, there are 3 scenarios and 3 solutions, and all of them have their drawbacks and benefits. Right? If I care only about the cited user's experience and I don't need to pass a checker, then, I'm fine with leaving it the way it is, or I'm not, but that person might be fine with leaving the way it is. They're going to have a bunch of untagged annotations. The nav will work for people who are using assistive technology. For people not using assistive technology, they won't know that the nav is there. Okay. Now, alternatively, you could make bookmarks that represent each of those navigation menus, and set the view properties, the initial view in your document, to page plus bookmarks panel, to have that open up so people can see there's this navigation, right? But for people using assistive technology, they have to press F6 to move from panel to panel to panel. So you have F6 from menu to sidebar, F6 from sidebar to bookmarks, F6 to the main content. So it's this little toggle you have to kind of go through to get there. Definitely not a good user experience, but not a barrier, right? So that would be a way you could provide both, but not pass a checker, not be accessible. Go ahead.
Well, and you were saying how, like, you're gonna get untagged annotations, right? I mean, we're kind of assuming, as you're saying that, we're kind of assuming that they put the nav bar on the master page, right? I mean,
well, you wouldn't get the error if they promoted it to the main content and they included it in tags, then they're gonna, that's just going to appear in the nav bar, in the content every so often. But typically, when someone comes to us to help us solve it, it's because they're failing a checker. In InDesign, right? We put this on the parent page. Right. But there's a way to solve that. Right, Chad?
Yeah. I mean, that there is, I mean, fundamentally what you need to do is you need to promote it to the document page, right? You need to say, I don't want this on the parent page. I want it on the document page. And, certainly one method is you can, shift command click or shift control click on Windows on each item to promote it to the document page. If you've got 7 boxes on every page times 50 pages, what I mean? Do the math. I mean, that's like, hopefully you get paid by the hour, what I mean? But there is a way in InDesign when you're on the master page, you can click on an object and go to the panel menu in the Pages panel.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an option in there that says allow master item overrides.
Sure.
Right. And if you play your cards right and you only enable that feature for the navigation items, you can then go into your document, select every page and say override all master page content. And only those navigations are going to pop onto the document page in the entire document. So it's a huge time saver.
Our class, the class that we teach at accessibilityunraveled.com, we have an InDesign class. And I think you do, kind of go over how to do that in the class. So if you're interested in learning more about that, head over to accessibilityunraveled.com. I think our InDesign class is going to be in the middle of August. We've got another one coming up, but that's so how you can solve it in the document. The other option is that in your PDF document, right? You say, look, I need to pass the checker. This has to be accessible. Then, like we talked about, you structure your content in a way that allows that navigation to split between the end of a paragraph. And you alluded to it. Maybe every page does start with a heading, but there's a couple that don't. Then that just means you need to go to that area in the tags tree and maybe move that navigation to the end of that block of text so that it doesn't split the block of text, but it appears at the end of the next, the end of that story, a logical section.
In a logical location. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's not a very big lift to grab 5 or 6 containers and move them down. And then you're okay. Now you've created a better user experience and it's still accessible. And then using that skip, press H to skip to main content. That's not a bad solution. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I always argue, I know people love these navigation items, but doesn't a table of contents effectively do the same thing? Right?
I think they like the convenience of having it on the right-hand side of the box. They like to be able to have it right there. But I argue that the bookmarks bar, the bookmarks panel is, again, another way to have it right there. They're just trying to make it look sexy. And I get that. But PDFs are not web pages. If you want your own app, go build it, right? Mm-hmm. A PDF is portable document format, not portfolio, digital, whatever. I mean, it is literally for a print documents to be able to maintain the same formatting. And unfortunately, some of the expanded features we've been able to do inside Acrobat become more of a hindrance than a help when it comes to accessibility. And then the final, way to solve this is to simply not have the menu bar, right? Is to just not have the menu bar and allow people to, I've even seen people use the comments feature. Oh, I didn't tell you about this, Chad. I literally got a document the other day. I opened it up and somebody had just made a comment using the comments panel for each of the different sections they wanted users to be able to go to. And so instead of making a bookmark or adding a TOC, they just made a comment on page 12. And the comment was like the heading of whatever it was, financial application. And it was that. And so you click on it and it bounces right there. And I thought, wow, that's a interesting and innovative way to use the program. But again, like we say, most of accessibility issues are people not using the program the way it was intended.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I know we're talking about navigation elements, but it can be applied to other elements as well. I was telling you, Dax, this past week I worked on a document and it was 500 and some pages.
Mm-hmm.
And at the bottom of every page, they had a paragraph that said, for more information, visit our website at blah, 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 blah.
Right.
At the bottom of every page.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's equally as poor of a user experience as having the navigation.
Oh,
right?
agreed.
Because you're reading every page, and at the bottom of every page, you've got to hear that paragraph being read again. Right?
Well, remember, and I talked about this with the person who had given me the exercise of the home button. I said, really, it's half a dozen of one, six of the other, because it's the beginning of one page, but the end of another page. So just like you were saying, really, you could say it either way. You could say, before I read every next page, or at the bottom of every current page, I have to hear this thing. Either way you describe it, it's still in the middle of every page.
Yeah.
In between pages, I've got to hear content.
And so I ended up artifacting, I left the first one there. Right. And then I artifacted all the other ones. Thank God for Common Look.
Yep.
Right. I'm slowly coming on board with Common Look. Dax is teaching me tricks that I can use, but that's a classic example. 500 pages.
Yeah.
I do not want to go through 500 pages page by page to make that happen.
Well, and to let our users know how that works. So in Common Look, there's a feature that says artifact header footer, and then it allows you to draw a region for where that header footer is. And then as long as every page that header footer appears in that same region, it artifacts that content inside that box. It's genius. It really is.
The bugger in this case is there was a link in the paragraph.
Sure.
And so it was like,
Yeah.
So anyway, I got it squared away, but it's very similar to what we're talking about. It doesn't have to be a navigation element.
Right.
Any element that you're kind of forcing the user to read on every single page is going to get very old very quick.
Page numbers, people do that with page numbers on PowerPoint slides. They want to hear the page number. So I think, you mentioned something earlier on. I think, we should really talk about, I think language is everything, right? Language controls culture. In this case, I think we need to talk about the difference between a barrier, a bad user experience, and a failure of success criteria, because I think each one of those is its own entity, right?
Sure.
Because I can have a document that passes WCAG and has a terrible user experience, or I can have a document that passes WCAG or PDF UA and there's a barrier because a program like JAWS or NVDA does not interact with that content the way we expect or want it to. Right. So you can have a combination of one or the other. And I think understanding what it is, in this case, where you and I were talking about this sideways menu, right? This menu that's on the right hand side. And you brought up the point of, well, Dax, this is a barrier. And I think we had a good conversation that I think our listeners would really enjoy about why it's not really a barrier, but it's a bad user experience. Because remember, the idea here is that we want to reduce friction when someone's reading a document, right? You and I, when we look at a document, we can scan the document and see there's 5 headings. In an instant, our brain recognizes their headings and sees them. Yep. For someone using a screen reader, they can pull up the list of headings, or they could just press H, and figure out how many headings are on the page, right?
Absolutely. I mean, users of assistive technology have to process every piece of that document to understand, what each area is. I was working with a client today where they had built a form, and they were like, well, how is the user going to know that this checkbox is checked? Because when you check the box, it grayed out a couple of the areas. And I'm like, well, the only way they're going to know is if they navigate through that. And when they get to the checkbox, it's going to say, checkbox, whatever the tooltip is, but it's going to say checkbox checked.
Right.
And that's how they're going to know. But again, like that's where, like, as a sighted user, we have that helicopter view that we could just at a glance look at something and know that it's enabled, disabled, whatever. Users of AT, they've got to peruse through the entire thing to know that, right?
Well, there's actually a success criteria that covers that. And I was getting ready to look it up while you were talking, but there's a success criteria that says, and I forgive me for not knowing this one by heart, but if a state of an object changes based on your action, you have to tell the user that other state changed. So in that case, if they filled in information in box A that triggered box J to be checked, the assistive technology is supposed to tell them when they finished filling out box A that, hey, box J just got checked.
Mm.
So I don't know what the success criteria is off the top of my head, but it's about changes in states being declared to a user, right?
Gotcha.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So barrier, so bad user experience is one thing. Barrier is the inability to access the information. So when we have this nav bar and it's not in the tags tree, but it is there for sighted users who are using a mouse, it is absolutely a barrier for someone using assistive technology. We cannot get to that information.
Yeah, it's not an equitable experience, right?
Right.
I mean, accessibility, equal access for all, right?
Right.
That's fundamentally accessibility, right? And so when as a sighted user, I have this navigation element that I can click on to go to different areas in my document, but a user of assistive technology does not have access to that. Well, yeah, then they're not going to have the same experience. But we're kind of contradicting ourselves because we're saying how the navigation is a barrier, but I guess we also need to. I'm sorry, the navigation is not a barrier, but the navigation as a user is reading it, it's a bad user experience. Right?
It depends on how it's coded, right? So if you had it represented in the tags tree, it is a bad user experience. If you don't have it represented in the tags tree, it is a barrier. Okay. So I think that's the thing is that, and then if you don't have it, it's also a failure if it's represented on page, but not in the tags tree because you have the untagged annotation error that you get along with it. Right. So there is a nuance to the approach you take, but in a lot of cases, it's not. If something's there, but it's low vision. Let's just say the text, the headings are a light gray color. That's not a barrier. That's a bad user experience if it were there in the tags tree, right? If I'm low vision, I may or may not use assistive technology here. And this is kind of even a nuanced thing. Now that I'm saying it out loud, it depends on what the end user is using, right? Because if the end user is just, I'm sighted, I don't use a screen reader, I just have bad vision and it's really light gray, I may not use assistive technology, so it could in fact be a barrier. Or I might need to screen mag. I might need to go in like 1600% to actually see it large enough for me to discern. So there are some nuances, but I think the point I think we're trying to make here is that a barrier is different than a bad user experience. A bad user experience is I can get to it, but it sucks. A table that has zero dash for every blank cell, and there's only like 5 checked boxes, and there's 100 grid
cells,
and only 5 of them are checked, and somebody puts dash in every one of them. We just had this on the message on our Facebook group, PDF accessibility. By the way, if you're new to the program, we're at 3,650 members now, buddy. We're doing good. So
that's great.
But yeah, they're like, look, how do I go through this? It's a terrible user experience because the table has 100, it had 100 rows and only a fraction of them had check marks. And even though the cells were blank, NVDA will still, or JAWS will still read each of those headers for every one of the cells and not just skip to the ones that have content, which is a really terrible user experience.
Yeah.
So again, user experience is bad, but I can get to it. Barrier is I cannot get to it.
I can't get to it.
Right. Yeah. And then a failure of WCAG or a failure of success criteria, PDF UA or WCAG, either way, that can be either a barrier or a bad user experience or both. So, I think it's just important that we remember not everything's a barrier, but almost everything that is a failure, everything that is a failure is a bad user experience. Right.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. So, and it kind of comes back to what we always say, designing with accessibility in mind, right?
Yep.
Like keeping that at the forefront of your mind as you're, designing or implementing a design, you want to try to ensure that it's going to be equitable to all users.
So, Chad, I want to talk about our upcoming classes, right? We've got 2 classes coming up, and one of them is is our document testing with NVDA. And that is happening on July 27th, right? That's a few weeks away, but I want to give people enough time to go and get if you need us to send you an invoice or send you a document to go get approved, we're happy to do that. And then our favorite class, at least one of my favorite classes, because it's so much interaction with the people in the class, is the next one coming up, which is July 20th, The Secrets of Writing Effective Alt Text.
And that's a really good one, because we hear that one all the time, right? We get that from a lot of people, where on paper writing alternate text is so simple, right? You just write alt text, but when people are in front of it and they're tasked with describing images, it is much harder than you would think. Right. And I think everybody's situation is a little bit different, right? I mean, some clients have different products or different, maybe they're, a question we always get asked is it important for me to describe the race of somebody in the image? Right. And, the answer is kind of simple. We always say, what do you want the user experience to be? Right. Like, if you're the UN, right, then the answer is yes. It's probably very important that you describe the race of the person in the image, right?
Well, I think it goes back to asking the question, is it important for the user to know the race of the person in the image? And if I'm talking about war in Honduras, then I'm going to say 3 small Honduran children, huddled around whatever. Or if I'm in Sierra Leone, or if I'm in India or wherever, it's important to know the ethnic context. But if it's not important to know, then you don't say it, right? I mean, it seems common sense to say, but we walk through a lot of exercises in the class where people get to actually type in alt text and put it into practice. We give you a cheat sheet that really helps you kind of understand what's going on. You get our secret formula for decoding bar charts, line graphs, and infographics, kind of how we do that, and to give a good equitable experience. So, and if you are not interested in doing your own alt text, our good friend Carolyn DeRosier is Scribely Tribe. Scribelytribe.org. Scribelytribe.org. I want to say it right. Scribely Tribe. It is scribelytribe.com, not .org. Scribelytribe.org. Scribelytribe.com. I'll get it right. She'll be happy that I get it right. But and she actually just released a report not too long ago. If you troll my LinkedIn or troll her LinkedIn, you'll find a link to a report she did on the alt text. And it was a pretty interesting report. And I thought it was definitely worth the read. So anyway, the bottom line is they have a team of expert alt text writers, and for a fee, they will help you write. Well, they will write alt text for you and give it back to you. And we really love the people over there at Scribely Tribe. They are a great group of individuals.
And Dax and I have ways of streamlining that workflow too.
Oh yeah.
When if you are in that situation where you're like, what, I'm not writing alternate text for 80 images in this document, I'm going to farm it out. You can use our script that will generate a spreadsheet for you. And you could provide that to, in this case, it could be Caroline or whoever's writing the alternate text, provide the document along with this spreadsheet and have them write the alt text in the spreadsheet. And then when you get that back, you run another script that basically takes all that alt text and makes it happen in the InDesign file.
It injects it in literally just like, I did one that was 500 images. It took 9 seconds. 9 seconds. Now, here's something that we don't actually post on our as a script for sale, but if you reach out to us, we'll we'll talk to you about it. But we have a version of that script that allows you to put multiple languages in each column of that script. And then you can literally, if you have a document that has to be done in, 4 or 5 or 6 or 13 languages, you can have one for every column. And then when you run the script, it will look at that and say, hey, this other version of the script we have, hey, I detect these 6 languages. Which one do you want to insert into your document? So pretty cool. And then we have also the ability, if you just put artifact in the alt text, it will artifact the image for you automatically. So pretty cool stuff. So whether you want to do it on your own, or whether you want to do it have somebody else do it, or whether you have a hybrid approach, Chad and I, we've got you covered between who we know and what we have. We are there for you guys. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thank you all for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed our discussion about, the Navbar, our discussion about alternate text and the various topics that we talked about today. Once again, we want to thank the North Idaho College and their upcoming Accessibility Camp Coeur d'Alene, which again is on August 2nd and 3rd in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Where you and I are going to be, right? We have a 2-day pre-conference lab, and then we're both doing one session each day. So I'm super excited about that. Yeah.
Yep, we are. We were there last year, and Jeremy Seta, who organizes that event, is a fantastic guy, and we're really looking forward to being there again this year. So so check it out at nic.edu/A11Y camp, and you're welcome to go. Right? It's a really fun event. It's very small, but it's a really fun event. You're going to learn a lot, and we just want to thank them for sponsoring us again on the podcast. So my name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.